The Rules Committee will come to order. We are here for consideration of items from two committees. First, the long-awaited Federal Aviation Administration conference report, and also items from the Committee on the Budget will follow. We're awaiting the arrival of the full committee chairman, Mr. Mica, but we're very fortunate to have the chairman of the subcommittee, our good friend, Mr. Petri. And so let me say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Thank you very much. We have concluded a conference with the Senate, and I believe all members in both parties signed the conference report in the House, and all but two in the Senate. So it's a bipartisan. It wasn't always bipartisan at every stage in the game, but
we know that.
As we know, with give and take and with a good spirit, we had a very congenial final session under the chairmanship of Senator Rockefeller and with our chairman, John Mica. And so we're hoping that the bill can be scheduled, the conference report can be scheduled so that after 23 short-term extensions overdue since 2007, we're about 5 years late on this reauthorization. It's very important to get the bill up and done for the aviation sector of our country, which is somewhere between 8 and 11% of the economy. And this bill will provide considerable increased opportunities for efficiency in that sector, and will produce more revenue more income for the country through efficiency and so on than it will cost the federal government.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Petri. Thanks for your hard work as the subcommittee chairman. And let me just, we all recall the major bone of contention on this had to do with those rural air facilities. How has that been handled in the conference?
It was compromised. There were standards put in place to reduce the number of airports, but the program, in our version, it was
subsidization, as I recall.
These are essential air service.
Right.
Essential air service was put in 40 years ago when we deregulated. Right. There were a number of communities that felt that was too abrupt, and so we put in an essential air service subsidized program that I think was covering some 50 or 60 communities around the country. Mm-hmm. We wanted to cut it back. Alaska is a special case because they don't have roads in much of it. And we think we achieved savings of some $20 million through the reorganization of the program and refine it, but it still will be in existence, but on a reduced basis.
It's been pretty dramatically reduced then from what it was?
Significantly reduced, I'd say.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Sessions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Chairman Petri, thank you for taking the time to view us. As you recall, over the years when you've given testimony up here, every time we tried to move forward with bills that would allow me to be heard, so we turned on my microphone. Thank you, David.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I knew there was some reason. I am, as I'm hearing about the opportunity for this to be worked on from the Senate and us, is a real victory, I think, for the process and to move forward in these kinds of opportunities. I think that the American people need to see more often where the Senate and the House can work together on difficult issues. This is a jobs bill. This is a jobs bill. This is a jobs bill for America. It is a jobs bill that needed to be accommodated on both bodies, and I applaud you for staying at the table, finding a way to make it work, and to bring to this committee and the floor a good bill, and I'll be supportive of it. I want to thank you very much.
Let me just say one comment, because this is worth it. What does the bill really do? It accelerates and puts in place a framework for what's called next gen, to move like we did in TV. We're all familiar going over from analog to digital. It's good for the environment. It will reduce fuel use of the aviation industry by some 20 to 30%. Shorten flights, increase safety, expand the capacity of the system without building additional runways, because planes will be able to fly safely more closely together. It's a win-win and it will improve our competitiveness because we've, since the Wright brothers, set global standards for aviation, and this will retain that leadership for our aviation industry.
Well, that's just a great talking point on the high side. On the low side, you've done a lot of hard work. I applaud you for staying at the table and your colleagues, our colleagues, for getting this done. I'm very proud of it, and thank you for your great service. I yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions, but I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a press release signed by a number of unions entitled Transportation Unions Call on Congress to pass clean FAA reauthorization, rewriting decades of labor law without debate or discussion sets a dangerous precedent. And I just ask unanimous consent to put that on the record. I think there are some provisions in this Congress report like this that really don't belong there. And if I could have this put in the record, that is.
Without objection, it will be included in the record. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congressman Petri. I want to say that I don't have any real questions, but I want to echo what my colleagues have said. We appreciate your sticking with this and getting it done. We are sorry that it has taken so long, and I think that we did not get past some of the other common sense issues that should have been passed in this bill, but I think it's terrific that you've gotten the kind of support that you have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Hastings. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Right? And it's fair for me to surmise that Mr. Mike is not going to be here. Certainly covered it. We are now awaiting the witnesses from the Budget Committee. And so here we go. Mr. Ryan, please come forward. Perfect timing.
Usually I sit around for
Glad to have you. No, we usually try to make you sit around, but we decided to break down.
That's great.
Clear the runway for you since. Excuse me?
Oh, good catch. Wow, that was great, Austin.
So I've just.
This is really nice. This triptych is pretty cool.
Thank you. I've just been told. I've just been told by my staff director that we decided to clear the runway for you because you just marked your birthday. So it's a birthday present for you.
A lot of people seem to know about that these days.
Good. So let me say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we will.
Here it is.
Summary.
All right.
Here it is.
First of all, let me start off by saying that this is the result of not just efforts by members of the Budget Committee, including Mr. Woodall, but of a lot of other members in the House that have put a lot of effort into trying to fix our broken budget process. I'm looking right at you, Chairman Dreyer, because you're sort of the father of budget process reform in Congress. When I first came here in 1990,
saying grandfather.
okay, great. You're welcome. When I came here,
It's been a while.
when I came here in '99 for my first session of Congress, it was the Dreyer Commission, the Dreyer Plan. You and some other members, Chris. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was
Lee Hamilton.
Lee Hamilton, Gradison. There were, I think, Leon Panetta was involved in some of these. There are a lot of people.
Pete Domenici.
Abraham Lincoln. Thank you. There are a lot of people who.
I'm not going to turn your microphone on.
So I'm trying to summarize my prepared text here. I'm getting way off subject here. There are a lot of people who have put a lot of effort into rethinking about how to fix this broken budget process. I, in particular, want to say Mr. Dreyer and Mr. Henseling have been a big part of people who are in this Congress of doing this. We're bringing two bills, 2 of the 10 reform measures that we have produced in the Budget Committee, many of which have joint jurisdiction with the Rules Committee. The first is the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act. That's Mr. Price. That's H.R. 3582. That bill is very simple. It says if we're going to consider large fiscal pieces of legislation, legislation that's large in its impact fiscally, why don't we actually look at the economic analysis of it? That was something that then the majority asked CBO to do for stimulus spending. That was kind of unique, by the way, at the time. When CBO did an analysis of stimulus spending, we think that pieces of large fiscal policy, 0.25% of GDP or higher, ought to trigger a macroeconomic analysis so we have a good sense for where this takes us from an economic standpoint. Our economy is still suffering. We're limping out of this recovery. We're not growing nearly as fast as we normally would have given prior recessions. The second bill is the Baseline Reform Act. That's Mr. Woodall's bill. This builds off the effort by prior people, by Mr. Gomert as well, to try and remove the spending bias that is in place in the discretionary spending line. We simply want to say this. When we measure spending for discretionary from government agencies, we will start with last year's level. We're not going to just assume an inflationary increase, because what that does is that basically assumes that government agencies can never be more efficient. Government agencies will not have any pressure to do more with less or to learn how to live more efficiently, how to be more productive. We want to remove that inherent inflationary spending bias out of the baseline so we can have an apple-to-apple comparison on government agency budgets as we go forward. This doesn't change fiscal spending decisions. It just gives us a more honest and clear measurement of those decisions. And with that, I just ask that the rest of it be included in the record.
Thank you very much. It's very clear, obviously, as you said, there are many of us who've been involved in the issue of budget process reform for a long period of time. It's been a roller coaster ride, and I hope very much that we're able to have some success. Thank you very much for the great work that you do. Mr. Sessions.
Chairman, thank you very much. Chairman Ryan, happy birthday and welcome to the Rules Committee as your cherry on top of the cake.
Always good to be back.
And all the fun we have up here.
What better birthday present than to come to the Rules Committee?
I could think of few that would be better. Paul, you have brought what I believe to be thoughtful ideas that some refer to as revolutionary, or perhaps some that will cause huge changes. In fact, your plan to balance the budget was going to take 30 years. That's because our country's in difficult straits. That's because what lies ahead is really difficult, and you see this with an eyeglass towards what we have to be prepared for. I want to be a person in this conference who says thank you. Thank you for objectively looking at what's ahead and seeing where we are today and how it's going to take a 30-year disciplined prospect to get to where we become solvent again. Yesterday, the administration, CBO, put out a new report on what's ahead, another $1 trillion deficit. And I just really want, without asking you too many questions, I really want to pat you on the back and say thank you for doing your job. Thank you for not jumping in and just doing as so many people do, just to go and demagogue something without coming up with an answer. And thank you for not trying to solve it in a way that created uncertainty. A 30-year view, in my opinion, is balanced and represents a thoughtful approach. And not many people want to wander that far out. So thank you for your consciousness, for your effort, and for your message that has been very clear, and that is it will require discipline, it will require a philosophy, and it will require all of us to look at what would happen if we are incapable of this, as opposed to seeing this as the danger that it is.
Yeah, thank you.
Gentlemen may have a comment about
I'll just give you two quick ones. Going back to 2008, sitting in those meetings with Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson when we were in the middle of a crisis that caught us by surprise, and then seeing the millions of jobs lost, seeing the trillions of dollars of wealth in people's savings accounts evaporate, I remember thinking, whatever we do not want to have a situation like this ever again. And if you ask yourself, what if we knew that that moment was going to come? And what if we knew what was necessary to prevent it from happening? And what if we had the time to do so? But for one reason or another, we decided not to because it wasn't good politics. What would you think of that person, that member of Congress? It's immoral. and look at where we are now. We have a crisis ahead of us, a debt crisis, and I'm not exaggerating here, that is far more dire than that moment. We know why it's happening. We generally know when it's happening. And more importantly, we know what we need to do to fix it, and we do have the time to do it, but not a lot of time left. And when I first started writing these budgets in 2007, back before all this crisis hit, they told us 10 years. Then the recession hit, and they told us about 5 years. Now they're telling us 2 or 3 years. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's the general consensus. And so what we're trying to demonstrate, you mentioned 30 years, is we believe we can preempt a debt crisis on our terms as a country right now if we go soon. That means we do not have to rip up the social contract or pull the rug out from under people who have already retired, who have organized their lives around these programs, or tear apart the safety net, which we think is important to get people back on their feet, if we go now. If we wait much longer and just allow it to happen, then that contract gets torn up. Then retirees who've already retired will see huge disruptions in these programs that they've organized their retirements around. Then the safety net gets cut indiscriminately. That's what austerity is. That's what Europe is doing. And they are in for a real tough time for a long time. We can preempt that. And so what we're trying to do here is put out a plan to fix this, but B, make sure that Congress has a system in place, has rules in place, has controls in place to make it as easy as possible for us to achieve that goal. And that's basically what this effort does.
It requires discipline and I think a basic sense of honesty about looking ahead. There are some of us who say, boy, you can't even predict what's going to be like next year. We need to prepare. We got to spend now. But I work off a philosophy that if you save, it's better to be in a position of having money when you really need it as opposed to not having it when you really need it. And we had a debate here yesterday during the Class Act, and a number of times I've had this debate and discussion about how government should only do, and I think the President really tried to say it this last week, the government should only do those things that can't be done by somebody else. And I am of a mind that we increasingly fail to do the things in government that we should do best. An example, you know my son Alex, and I'm not unlike many other people that have a disabled child. Many families in this country do. But as I near 60, 70, 80, 90, I am worried about him having to compete with everybody else because we're really trying to help everybody rather than what government really should do and do right. Conversely, use the word moral, what's morally right. I fervently believe it is morally wrong for people to ask somebody else to do something for them that they should be doing for themselves, especially over a lifetime. I was young. I was incapable of taking care of myself. When I'm older, I quite possibly will need help also. But in those other years, we should fend for ourselves. I think what you're hearing from, which you're a very good listener and a very good clear thinker, is to say, let's form a future that combines the best of both of those, but guarantees an outcome that is better. Thank you for your service. I'm very, very proud of my association with you. The few years that I spent on the Budget Committee, I enjoyed with you and Jimmy Nussle, and I'm very proud of your leadership.
Thanks.
I yield back.
It's your birthday, so we're going to.
Go
I'm going
to milk this for all it's worth.
Yeah, all you had to do is come and say it's your birthday, and then you can avoid questions. Look, I just want to say, in terms of this legislation, I don't buy into this like you do, that this is a serious effort to control spending. I mean, simply
Well, these are parts of a bigger
but
effort.
simply pretending that inflation doesn't exist doesn't make it so. And I just also say that so there's no misunderstanding. I mean, there are many of us on this side of the aisle who feel as passionately as you do, Mr. Sessions, about getting spending under control and dealing with this debt. And many of us who were here when Bill Clinton was president, we voted for things that helped get this country on the right track. I think that the challenge here is more of a philosophical one, is where do you find the savings and where do you make the cuts? And whether you believe the tax cuts, play a role in the current crisis we have, or you don't. Whether or not we should be, we should address the issue of war costs or not. Whether or not we should have paid for that prescription drug bill that you passed or not. So the issue is not one of whether, your party has a monopoly on wanting to get our fiscal house in order. I think we feel just as strongly. It says we are very concerned about not obliterating the safety net in the process. And I don't think anyone over here believes that we should be, giving handouts to people who can, fend for themselves. I've never heard anybody on our side of the aisle advocate that kind of approach to government. But there are philosophical differences here, and I just wanted to say that for the record. And I again wish you a happy birthday.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Hollen, we've begun questioning of the panel, and thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like to, we've already gotten into a discussion on this.
I did an off-the-cuff
just
for the
submitted a
record.
statement for the record, and
So I just
talked about the measures that we have before us. So if you'd like to briefly offer some comments, we'll pick up with questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and happy birthday to you, Mr. Chairman. And I should say that the Budget Committee has considered a number of budget process reform bills, as have you in the Rules Committee. And there are many on which we have differences, including the ones today. There is one, a significant bill that has bipartisan support. I should say there are both Democrats for the bill. Myself and Mr. Ryan are among them, and then there are others. That's the expedited rescission legislative line item veto bill, which I think you had a discussion about last night. As for the two that are before you now, the first one on baseline budgeting, we think creates a very misleading sort of picture of what the discretionary budget will be in the out years, because it doesn't take into account inflation. I think all of us in this committee and the Congress know that when we're trying to translate dollars in the current year into the purchasing power in some other year, whether it's a future year or a past year, we always translate that into real dollars. So we're comparing apples to apples. If you put in the budget, that you're getting $1 million for defense this year, and you don't account for inflation next year, and you had 100% inflation, you put that $1 million for defense in next year, it's not going to buy you nearly as much defense. And so it creates a misleading impression of what kind of goods and services we're going to be purchasing through our discretionary budget, which is why CBO has adopted the rule that it has. And I don't see any reason to change the rule in a way that I think would create great misperceptions as to our purchasing power. With respect to the other bill, Mr. Price's bill, there are a number of issues that it raises. The first is, and I just refer the Chairman and members of the committee to your own rules. I mean, the rules already require an economic analysis of major tax bills, and that seems to be the primary focus of this legislation, although it does include other expenditure programs. But it is curious that in the bill itself, they sort of instruct the CBO to use a current policy baseline with respect to revenues. So that, for example, if we want to know what the long-term economic impact of changing the current law to continue all the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts would be, you would be working off of a $0 baseline, which wouldn't trigger any economic analysis. I don't know why we wouldn't want that economic analysis. I'm happy to. We asked for clarification on this,
let me
and it
get
has
into
not
that.
been changed.
This gets a little complicated. I think we were talking past each other the other day, and there's two issues here. There's the triggering mechanism, what triggers the analysis. And that we think is appropriate because the law uses the extended baseline, meaning the official CBO baseline. So the triggering mechanism is the official CBO baseline. That's current law baseline. The analysis, we think, because the alternative fiscal scenario is what we think is closer to reality. That's what CBO thinks is closer to reality. The Bowles-Simpson Commission, the Super Committee, the off-the-hill commissions like the Rivlin Domenici, they all use that baseline that they think is closer to reality. And so we think it's better for us to measure the economic effects of what we think is closer to reality. And so the analysis is off of the alternative fiscal scenario with this policy because we think that's been sort of the consensus of all of our various efforts around here to try and get at optimal tax policy or what is more realistically going to happen. But the triggering mechanism, we should stick with current law and the way CBO does that, which is the extended baseline. Now, I know that sounds kind of complicated, but in the budget world, I'm trying to bring it as clear as possible. That's our intent. And I just want to make sure we clarify. The triggering mechanism is the current law baseline. The analytical mechanism is the alternative fiscal scenario, which we think better reflects reality.
So I don't mean to engage in a dialogue
I know,
here, but with your
we need
permission,
the rest of these, but yeah.
Mr. Chairman, two things. One, Simpson, Bowles, Rivlin, Domenici, they all used what they referred to as a plausible baseline.
But it
No,
was
no,
not the extent. It was not current law baseline.
But it is not a current law, but it's not current policy. What you prescribe in here is current policy. All of them worked off of a baseline that assumes that the tax cuts for the top 2% will expire. That's what Simpson Bowles assumes in its baseline.
We have what
That's
CBO
what
gives us,
right?
and that's the alternative baseline they give us.
No, I understand, but that means your analysis on this revenue policy, if it's off the current policy baseline, you're not going to get an analysis
We're not
of the
making a
tax
value
changes.
judgment because we don't agree on those different
Right.
policies,
But,
obviously.
okay. But I guess the point is, at least the way it's written, our reading of it is you would not get this economic analysis if there's legislation introduced to change current law in order to keep current policy. And the interesting part about that is we've seen a couple CBO analyses of the long-term economic impact of that. And what they show is in the years 9 and 10, it slows down economic growth because it increases the deficit, which creates in fuller employment times, crowds out private borrowing and investment, and actually creates negative GDP growth. So it's just a little curious the way this is set up. We wouldn't get a fresh analysis from CBO that indicated, I've got analyses here just for the record, September 28, 2010, CBO analysis showing that if you extend all the Bush tax cuts in the later years, you will see a negative impact on the economy, a negative impact on GDP growth. That was the same testimony we received from Tom Barthold of Joint Tax when he testified before the the special committee, the joint committee in September. So I don't know. It's just kind of curious that that's a major change in law. It may be current policy, but it would be a major change in law, and we wouldn't be getting a fresh analysis. The other point I would make on this bill is that we're not sure why if we're going to take into account the economic impact of tax cuts, we wouldn't also take into account the economic impact of important investments we make in infrastructure. I mean, if we had a sustained infrastructure investment over the next 10-year period, I think most economists, including the chairman of the Federal Reserve, would say that could help promote economic growth, and yet they specifically exempt any economic impact from appropriations bills. So this is a sort of one-sided approach, even though when you look at even the one side, they've kind of, at least for now anyway, seem to have blotted out one of the major analysis we might expect. So we don't support these bills.
Well, let me just say, I want to go to Ms. Fox, who is next on the panel. But let me just say that one of the things that has been extraordinarily frustrating for so many of us, and I just refer to myself as the grandfather before you came into the room. Paul called me the father of many of these reforms before anyone in the room was born, except for maybe Don Wolfensberger, who's been here longer than I. But the fact is, the notion of not taking into consideration the ramifications of GDP growth that comes about because of tax policy is something that has been very troubling to many of us for a long period of time. And I hope that as we move forward, we're going to have the opportunity to do just that. And I understand. I mean, we just had a hearing and are going to be reporting out the measure that will allow us to do, after 23 temporary extensions, the Federal Aviation Administration conference report. And we have, we're going to be considering a transportation bill, as we all know. And we know that, I mean, it's clear that these things do provide growth, but the thing that's been so frustrating is the fact that we are not able to engage in the kind of analysis that I believe is necessary for us to have when it comes to the issue of GDP growth as a result of tax policy. So let me just, I know that you wanted to offer a comment here. Why don't we go to Ms. Fox, and we'll go down, and then
No problem.
you can offer any comments that you'd like. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Paul particularly for the good work that he's been doing on this for the last several years, and thank you for having led the way in earlier times. I don't have any questions, but I think the American people want us to show them how we can solve this problem. That's what they're asking for. They know we have a problem. We've convinced them of the problem. And I think they're beginning to look at other countries and seeing where their problems are. And I think you're right about what's going to happen in Europe. And it's really, really important, I think, that we make many moves to go in the right direction, because I think the American people are ready to do that. And it's unfortunate that we've had so much pushback on this from the other side of the aisle, from the other chamber, and from the White House. We're basically doing our part. We have to get the message out. I think Paul's doing a great job of telling that message when he gets a chance to do that. And I wish we all had this flowing through our veins as you do and could speak about it as well as you do. But I want to thank you for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank both of our presenters. And I guess, Mr. Ryan, the song that Tennessee Ernie Ford sings, "You get another day older and deeper in debt," kind of takes on new meaning for you today, particularly in light of the fact that you've been a leader in this regard. The concern that I have is this measure requiring CBO to submit a long-term budget outlook for the next 40 years?
Yeah, we work with CBO to do that. That's what they believe they are capable of doing, and they do produce those kinds of analyses. The reason is because we're in a unique position in this time in this country where we're making sort of generational decisions. And the trajectory and the outcome of these decisions we make have profound effect on the next generation. And we think it's helpful to policymakers to have a handle on what those effects will be. And so CBO does believe they can produce that kind of an analysis.
So then it requires CBO to report an alternative baseline projection that assumes the extension of the Bush tax cuts and the AMT relief and the current estate tax.
Yeah, so let me get into that.
And gift tax rules?
Yeah, no, it's not making a policy judgment saying what has to happen in policy. What Chris is getting at is something you're going to hear a lot of. And it's not a partisan thing. What we're having here is we're having a collision of two different baselines. And the one, we have a current law baseline, and because of Congress under both parties, we do things in fits and starts. We do things temporarily. We got a 27% cut to doctors coming, in what, a month? And we don't, in our baseline, measures that and assumes those things. So the more we keep doing temporary measures, the more unrealistic the current law assumptions are. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to do, for instance, on taxes, the extension of, let's just call them the Bush tax cuts, everybody calls it that. The extension of those tax cuts, I'm rounding, is about $4.6 trillion over 10 years. We agree on 3.8 of that. meaning you want the top two rates to go up, but you want the rest of it to stay put. And so there's agreement on about 3.8 of the 4.6. And so that tells us that we should be probably planning on looking at keeping all or most of these things, since most people agree with that. So that's closer to what is really going to happen, meaning this other baseline, than the official CBO baseline, which says we're going to have a $4.6 trillion tax increase. We're not. You know what? Because I don't know a Democrat or a Republican around here who's suggesting that's going to happen. And so we're saying, let's analyze these things off of what we think are truer policy projections than this baseline that not a single Democrat or Republican agrees with. And the problem we have, LC, is we have messed this up so much. And it's not a Democrat fault or a Republican fault. It just is what it is, which is we have this baseline that is every year more mythical and more impossible and never going to happen. And so we're finding ourselves making policy decisions off of a different baseline that we think is closer to the truth, but we disagree on where that truth is, what will happen. So we agree, for sure on 3.8 of the 4.6, but we think it should be 4.6.
Where does that
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but I consider what you're saying to be more than reasonable, and I recognize that we have differences when it comes to how to get there, but not meant to trigger my good friend Mr. Bishop and mine in his baseball play, but Yogi Berra once said the predictions are hard to make, especially the future. Yeah, and I'm concerned as to whether or not this measure allows that CBO does not assume current law, and if so, why?
Well, so the law, meaning the CBO baseline, assumes current law, which is that's the CBO baseline.
All right.
The current law baseline, or the CBO baseline. But increasingly these days, that is farther from what really will happen than not. And so we think it's better for policymakers to have an assessment of what we think is more likely to happen than this thing that we know will not happen. That's
Well, we said that the Bush tax cuts should sunset.
Actually, you don't. You say 3.8 trillion should not, and 800 billion should. Is I think your position. I'm generalizing your caucus.
Why should we even negotiate? Why should we even negotiate sunset dates then if they are not going to be reflected in future CBO scores?
In this particular issue, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, these tax policies were never meant to be sunset. When they passed the House, they were permanent policy. Only because of the Byrd rule in the Senate and the inability to get 60 votes at the time when Tom Daschle was majority leader is why the sunset date was inserted in here in the first place. It was never the intent of Congress at the time to have that sunset.
All right. The questions that I put, Mr. Van Hollen, do you have any reaction at all?
Well, I just emphasize the 2 points I made earlier, that first of all, when you're talking about a change in current law, after all, we work off legislation. When you're talking about trying to get analyses that reflect the consequences of legislative actions we take, you would think that that's a pretty big action if we were to go from current law to permanent current policy. And as I said, the current CBO analyses show that in the out years, that actually creates a drag on the economy because of the higher deficits that you incur. And secondly, I see no reason if we're going to ask for these analyses not to ask for analysis of the pro-growth benefits of investments in things like infrastructure, science and research, things that we know have helped propel the economy in the past. So you're sort of asking for only one side of the story.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you all for the time. I'll have an opportunity, I believe, on the floor tomorrow, managing the rule, to discuss it. But I don't think that we can pretend that inflation doesn't exist. If we do, then I'm going to stop paying my water bill and all these other things that just keep going up, because it's nothing but pretend. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Elsie. Before you pay your water bill, you've got to find that leak that's costing you $300 a month.
That's true.
So.
And guess what? Today they cut all the water off, and you wouldn't believe how angry I am with the local government.
I heard down there.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, I also would like to wish you happy birthday, although not really, because when I was your age, I was already using Just for Men to try and cover up the gray. So when you finally start coming, when I can actually see it, then we'll wish you a happy birthday from that point on. Like, I've been told that I don't ask anything except irreverent and sarcastic questions here anyway. But I have to admit, this entire debate of the level of policy indexes that impact the starting point for making assumptions of government is really bizarre for anyone who cut his or her teeth at the state level in making these kind of policy decisions. So I think I wish we could move this forward to the floor, have the full debate on it. It's a unique situation. Thank you for bringing it to us. And I really don't have any other questions. I'm not smart enough to have any other questions.
Thank you. And I do strongly support the Bipartisan Expedited Rescission Line Item Veto Act. I think that's a very constructive step to take, and the type of bill where, if we can see that through, could really have an impact on reducing unnecessary expenditures. Contrasted to two bills before us today, which seems to be more gamesmanship. And gamesmanship is not strictly the purview of the current majority party. My party is just as guilty. I mean, if we had dynamic scoring for health care reform, rather than reducing the deficit by $200 billion, we probably could have said it reduce the deficit by $1 trillion or $2 trillion. We could have come up with whatever we felt like. And I think the danger on either side of going this route of giving the weight to dynamic scoring that we have with the current process would be dangerous. And it's a step in that direction. I understand it doesn't fully replace the current scoring. The inflation one, I really just don't get. I was a businessman before I got here, and I understand that, when we have very low inflation and have had for a few years, but it wasn't that long ago where we had 9%, 10% inflation, late 70s, early 80s, and that is a major impact. I mean, you can sort of fudge 1% or 2%, but I mean, any company in doing their budget always takes into account inflation and their expenses. So I'll have another question later, but my first question to Mr. Ryan is, why should the federal government look at its budget differently than every company in America and every household in America, which always build in assumptions of inflation?
So let me first say, just to be clear, the analysis we're asking for CBO is not, I can't see it, sorry, is not replacing their typical analysis. It's supplementary. So it's just for member education. It doesn't, we're not scoring dynamically from now on with this. This is not
It's
a supplementary analysis that does not replace what we
No, absolutely. I just said it's a step in that direction. No, I maybe that was towards the end of my comments when your colleague was whispering.
I just want to make sure.
No, I absolutely agree. It's not replacing it.
Right.
I acknowledge that. It's a step in the fictional direction.
Okay, sure. So why not put inflation in the baseline for discretionary spending? I would say the simple reason is, if there's going to be bias, let's put bias in favor of efficiency and productivity enhancements. Let's not just assume inflationary increases every year for discretionary spending, because we think that puts a pro-spending bias in the baseline, which takes the pressure off of where it ought to be placed, which is to improve efficiency, to improve productivity, and to just measure it. How many times have you had constituents, at least I get this a lot, where people say, if you spend $1 more this year than you did last year, then you spend $1 more, but you don't measure it that way. And that frustration that we get from taxpayers is something that we think is legitimate, and therefore we think it ought to be put into, and this is discretionary spending. Now, if we're talking about earned entitlements, where a person pays into a system to get a benefit out later on, to protect their purchasing power, say like Medicare, we're not doing this to those programs. This is strictly on the discretionary side.
And do you maintain your assumptions vis-a-vis inflation on the revenue side, the increases in wages that would result?
Yep.
So again, what the danger in that is there's then a disparate treatment. You have one set of inflation assumptions for revenue and a different set of inflation assumptions.
No, there's not different inflation. We don't measure. We don't have different CPIs. There's one CPI. It's just whether we apply CPI to a baseline or not.
So again,
it's not being applied to the.
Yeah, if I can just go to Mr. Van Hollen on this point, I'd appreciate his insights on the treatment of wages and therefore revenue and continuing assumptions there versus expenditures.
But, you know, I think your question raises the right point, which is why would you have two different standards apply? In other words, I think we'd all agree that if we didn't index the tax brackets, that our constituents would see that as a real increase in their tax liability. It would be if you didn't take into account inflation. The same is true when it comes to the other mandatory spending. So when you're trying to make the best guess for public policy purposes as to what we're going to be able to purchase with the discretionary budget, you should take into account inflation. I mean, it's not a bias. It's reality. In other words, it's projecting forward, which CBO does in all its analysis. Everyone who does economic analysis looks at that and saying, you know, if we're going to be able to purchase the same number of aircraft carriers 5 years from now as today, we have to take into account inflation, or whether it's educational support, whatever it may be. So it makes no sense to have different standards apply if what we're trying to do is get the best sense of what we can purchase with the dollars that are available in terms of goods and services.
I would say the law is different, though, because mandatory spending law, tax law, requires and mandates inflation. So those laws say guard against inflation. Discretionary spending doesn't do that because we don't have future discretionary spending. We do annual discretionary spending. So there's a real difference here, which is when we do, food stamps or Medicare or bracket creep on the tax code, the law that Congress passed says protect against inflation. We don't do that with discretionary spending. So that's why we think we should just measure accordingly.
And I know that the chairman is fully, aware of the implications of this, and I understand the rhetorical goal and the fun and games when it's fudgeable at 1 or 2%. But when you have, when you set this precedent and you have inflation at a significantly higher number, you could wind up with dealing with, the ability to purchase things for our military that simply aren't there.
This doesn't change spending levels.
Sure,
this just depends how we measure it.
Well, it creates a larger detachment between reality and the budgeting process if you have significant inflation. Again, I understand the rhetorical.
And so the bias from our perspective is against automatic spending increases.
And that's a good rhetorical point. At 1 or 2% inflation, it becomes a major detachment from reality at a potentially higher inflation rate. And
but Congress,
it destroys the credibility of our budget process if you have a larger inflation figure, which is we're well under the norms of the average now.
But as you know, every year Congress does discretionary spending, and Congress can take that into advisement when it sets discretionary spending levels.
My final question, again, for the chairman, and I like to bring this up whenever we have the opportunity on the budget process. I know you're looking at a number of bills, which again, I certainly support the expedited rescission line item veto act. Would you be able to consider looking at the capital budgeting process and the accounting for capital budgeting as part of the federal budget as one of your budget reforms?
I think we're going to, at the request of Mr. Blumenauer, we're going to have a hearing in Budget Committee on that in May, I'm thinking. We got to get through the budget process.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenauer, we've agreed to have a hearing on that.
I'll look forward to discussing that with Mr. Blumenauer. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again for putting me on the Budget Committee. As the Rules Committee designee there on the Budget Committee, I've gotten to do some fantastic work in 11 months with both Mr. Van Hollen and Mr. Ryan. And when you talk about folks who are the father of the budget process, it doesn't do you any good to have a father of the budget process if you don't have a committee system that's willing to bring these bills out and a leadership system that's willing to bring these bills to the floor, as is the case with the bill that I'm happy enough to have my name associated with, the Baseline Reform Act. I know this has been an issue in this Congress for years and years before I arrived here, but no one has had the courage to bring it to the House floor, and I'm grateful to you for doing that. And I'm grateful to you, Mr. Van Hollen, for the really substantive discussion. I have the pleasure, most folks don't, of serving on probably the two most bipartisan committees here in the U.S. House of Representatives. I get it here by day, and I get it in the Budget Committee on the other half, and I am the better for it. Just to reiterate, to make sure I'm clear, Mr. Ryan, we had a hearing this morning where CBO laid out their analysis, and the baseline had two lines. It had a line called CBO analysis, CBO baseline, and then it had a line called alternative scenario. And that alternative scenario was, getting to my colleague Mr. Polis's point, what if we assume reality, which is that these tax cuts are not going to all expire? What does that do to the baseline? But the CBO baseline remained the same, discarding the reality that these are not going to expire. When it comes to doing dynamic scoring, what's the answer to that? The CBO baseline, as it exists today, is that changed at all?
No.
By the
No. Doesn't change anything.
by the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act?
No.
So Mr. Polis is concerned that we're going to separate ourselves from reality. Exactly the same baseline tomorrow that it is today. We're just going to add a new line.
Supplementary
with
information
new
to help us make better decisions as to whether or not the policies we're considering are good for the economy or not, is basically the idea here.
Now, and is dynamic scoring a partisan issue? Mr. Polis brought it up in the context of health care reform. My recollection was in the stimulus bill, I saw some dynamic analysis that said this is how much it's going to cost America, but we think it's going to create jobs, we think it's going to create growth. Does that
And CBO produced that analysis at the request of the speaker then, I think, which was a spending largely bill. There were some refundable tax policies in it and some depreciation and things like that, but it was mostly spending. This would trigger the same kind of thing. The same kind of analysis that Speaker Pelosi asked for is the kind of analysis we're saying ought to be routinely provided on really large fiscal policy like that.
Speaker Pelosi's asking for it. Congressman Tom Price is introducing a bill. It comes from both sides of the aisle to try to get more information. Well, again, it is just my absolute pleasure. If the committee's excited about these two bills, and I know that they are, just wait until you see the budget that the committee's going to produce. There's really excitement right around the corner. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate both the Chairman, Mr. Ryan, and Holland being here. You bring up on the baseline, and I guess that's the problem that most of us have. Having been in a different life in regards to running an agency, having a budget, I wish that we would automatically have gotten an increase just because of inflation. We had to go in and fight for every increase and justify the reason, whether it's an inflationary increase because of insurance costs or, cost of ammunition or cost of whatever. We had to go in and justify that it wasn't just an automatic. This is one of the few places I've seen that you get an automatic increase, basically, and if it gets reduced, then you say you got to cut. That is really, from where I come from, or at least most of the people I know, they see that as somewhat disingenuous. Because, yes, my bill on my water may go up, but it doesn't mean my salary went up. So I have to make decisions as to how I'm going to pay that water bill. If my mortgage payment goes up because taxes increased or insurance went up, I still have to then make a decision. I don't go and ask the employer, say, hey, listen, this all went up, so you have to give me X amount of dollars more. That's not how the real America works. And this is sort of not like real America, at least from what I've seen. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, this really is putting the emphasis back on the agencies.
That's right.
To say, justify why I need more, or try to do more with less. Is that?
And we're not even making a discretionary spending decision. Congress decides that every year.
Right.
We're simply saying we're going to measure you to what you spent last year.
Kind of the way it is across the board in state government, county government, city government.
Yeah.
So I commend you on moving that forward. And my good friend sitting next to me, we're just so pleased as punch that he's on the Budget Committee to help you. Thank you.
Mr. Scott. Mr. Webster. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
All righty.
Appreciate your service, and we look forward to proceeding with these measures. And our next witness is the gentlewoman from Houston, Ms. Jackson Lee. Doesn't appear that she's in the room, so we will close the hearing for consideration of these Budget Committee items. And we are ready to go. We're not ready to go. Okay, well, let's proceed with consideration of the FAA conference report, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for consideration of the conference report accompanying H.R. 658.
the FAA Reauthorization Reform Act of 2011. Rule waives all points voted against the conference report and against its consideration. Rule provides that the conference report shall be considered as read. Finally, rule provides that the previous question shall be considered as ordered without intervention of any motion except 1 hour debate and 1 motion to recommit if applicable.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me just say that this is a standard rule for consideration of a conference report, as was pointed out by Mr. Petri. Every Democrat and every Republican on the conference in both houses of Congress signed the conference report, and so I presume that we'll be able to proceed to get this important work done after having had 23 temporary extensions, as was pointed out. So any discussion or amendment? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Being the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr. Webster will be managing this rule for the majority, and Ms. Slaughter for the minority. I've just been informed that we don't have the rules ready. Is that right, Mr. Clerk here of the Mr. Staff Director? And so, is there a reason for that, or you want to tell us? Or I mean, we're ready to go. I just want you to know the Rules Committee is ready to act. We've got the full complement here, and so just wanted you to be aware of the fact that we're anxious and ready to go. But based on your action, the committee will be in recess, subject to the call of the chair. 15 minutes is what we're hoping. Thank you. So we'll be in recess for 15 minutes. I'm happy to report that we now have the rule for consideration of these two measures before us, and let me say that we are going to entertain a motion from the gentleman from Dallas.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 3578, the Baseline Reform Act of 2011 structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate on the bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute, consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 112-9 dated January 25, 2012, shall be considered as adopted and provides that the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. The rule makes an order as original text for purposes of amendment, the amendment to H.R. 3578, printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report accompanying the resolution, if offered by Representative Jackson Lee of Texas or her designee. The amendment shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 3582, the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act of 2011, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on the Budget. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment. The amendment in the nature of substitute, consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 112-10 dated January 25, 2012, and provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the amendment in the nature of substitute. The rule makes an order only those amendments to H.R. 3582 printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report accompanying the resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by the member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've heard the motion, gentleman from Dallas. Let me briefly explain that we are trying our darndest to make all of the amendments in order. We had on the first measure one of the amendments withdrawn, another was non-germane, and so we've made an order the Slaughter amendment. On the second amendment, on the second bill, we have made 7 Democratic amendments in order, 1 Republican amendment in order, and I believe that that this rule will provide an opportunity for consideration of basically all of the different major policy options that are before us, which is what we're trying to do with these measures. So, any amendments to the rule, Ms. Slaughter?
No, but Mr. Chair, I didn't have an amendment.
Oh, you get an amendment in an order here? Oh, there's an amendment listed on here.
Can I put that off to another day?
Which, where's the amendment here?
It's not there.
She doesn't have an amendment.
We didn't file.
Oh, okay. Okay. Mr. Okay. Mr. McGovern?
Well, we're going to work with you to try to do our darndest to get an open rule here, so I'm going to ask that we have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee grant H.R. 3578 and H.R. 3582 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Well, we'll do our darndest to make sure that we have the opportunity to consider as many policy ideas as possible, and I think the best way to do that is with the rule that we've reported forward here. So I urge a no vote. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion chair, the noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
And the clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Hastings.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order and give the necessary waivers for the following amendments to H.R. 3578. Number 4 by Ms. Jackson Lee, and number 1 by Mr. Losbach, and number 10 by Ms. Jackson Lee, and number 7 by Mr. Quigley.
Heard the motion of the gentleman. Vote occurs on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. Pay the chair the
Mr.
noes.
Chairman, I ask
Clerk,
for-
call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman?
And the
No.
clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. The vote now occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And this will be handled by Mr. Woodall, our representative on the Budget Committee. And Mr. Hastings, let me just say that we are going to be meeting next at 9:30 Friday morning for consideration of the Federal Property Sales Act. So thank you all very much. Got lots ahead of us. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.